I subscribe to a bunch of Substacks, and one of my favorites is called Al Kabulan, which is written and recorded, because there's also like an audio podcast piece to it and frequent social media posts by a Nigerian content creator who calls himself the Merc. I want to read you a little bit of his latest offering. The title is it's interesting, right? Because it's going to resonate with what's happening in this country. The title is Nigeria Deleted Its Own History. What? Yeah. Let me read a little bit of this. Quote, when I first learned that Nigeria had no history in its schools, I thought it was a rumor, a made up story for clicks and engagement on social media. How could a nation so vast, so rich in culture, decide that history didn't matter? Then I cast my mind back to my school days in Lagos and then realized what I'd learned wasn't history, but rather social studies. It wasn't a rumor. In 1982, under the new 6334 education system, the government removed history from junior secondary schools. They folded it into something called social studies, a curated mix of lessons designed to emphasize the unity of Nigeria as a state. No deep dive into kingdoms before colonialism. No serious study of the Civil War. Just a neat story about the Federal Union. By 2009, things got worse. History wasn't just diluted, it was erased. Under Imaru Musa Yar Adua, the new basic curriculum eliminated history completely from both primary and junior secondary schools. For over a decade, Nigerian children grew up with no structured history education at all. Wild, right? Do we have the Merc? Is he here?
He's not here
Oh,
yet.
he's not here yet. Ooh, okay, we're gonna wait for him to get here. I'm excited to talk to him, so hopefully he will be here now. He not only does this site called The Merc, but he also has a graphic novel series called The Crusaders, which is actually very cool. It's like a graphic novel, but I am excited to talk to him. We're gonna let him get in. But while we're waiting for the Merc to get here, the reason that I care about this story and the reason it's interesting is that Nigeria, which is a huge country, it's like 162 million people, it's a big, big country, one of the largest countries on the African continent. It is an object lesson in what happens when a country makes an affirmative decision to erase and eliminate its history, to eliminate it, erase it altogether so that it doesn't exist, so that people won't know what happened at all, such that you can kind of do to them what you will. The fact that that was done in Nigeria and that people didn't even notice it until later, and that students grew up going through school, going through the entire school system, not knowing anything about the history of their own country is actually terrifying. And the fact that that could happen here is the reason that I find this really fascinating, because if it can be done in Nigeria, and recall, Nigeria is a country that's like bifurcated. There's a Muslim half and there's like a Christian half, and they go at it, they fight about it, right? And so there's not a lot of unity. And there was a literal civil war that was effectively erased from history. Seem familiar? Our civil war was treated basically the same way. We had a civil war that was over whether or not the country was going to be a slave holding nation or was going to be a free nation. It couldn't be both. But after the Civil War was over, what happened was not a reckoning with the fact that we were a slave plantation economy, and there was no reckoning with the people who were enslaved and what to do with the people who were enslaved and therefore had very little literacy, very little economic opportunity, no land, no nothing to start from. They just were, slavery just ended. And this group of people were here, trapped, stuck here, couldn't really go anywhere. And there they were, right? And there was no idea what to do with them. And so rather than reckon with that and figure out how to make those people whole, something like a reparations to sort of make those people whole so that they could start off on an even playing field with the white people who were their enslavers or were not involved in the system, but were benefiting from the system, rather than deal with that. Like we did 12 years of trying to deal with that. But then we just said, you know what, forget it. Let's just pretend it never happened. Change the whole story, say that it was not about slavery at all, that the Civil War was just about states' rights or some like ephemeral concept. Let the losers of the Civil War put up statues all over the country, all over, particularly the South, but some in the North too, celebrating themselves as if they were the winners, rewrite the whole thing, and allow the system that oppressed those enslaved people to continue to proliferate into the 20th century, such that you had to have a whole civil rights movement to fix it. Letting go of history did not aid us. It didn't help us. Next year is going to be the 250th birthday of the United States. But the problem is it was a stunted growth. because of the erasure of history. I'm not sure we're gonna have the Merc, unfortunately. I think something might have happened in terms of
I'm
him.
not sure. I'm still waiting on him to call out.
We're still waiting for
We
him to
got the
come in.
producers
Okay, so
reaching out to him.
we don't know that he's coming through, unfortunately. He's in Nigeria. So if we don't get the Merc, we will bring him back another time. But it is a fascinating history, and it is something for you to think about because next hour, we are gonna talk about this Purple Revolution. And I think these two things are related, right? Because if you don't reckon with what happened, if you can erase a country's history and have children grow up with this stunted, sort of gauzy version of history that covers over all of the bumps and the warts in history, which is what Lindsay Halligan wanted to do. And then they come up and they don't know. And then the lack that they face, they can't explain, right? Because to explain it, they'd have to understand the history that they don't have access to it. They
Well,
don't
isn't that what
necessarily know it.
ProGU was doing? Isn't
Th
that what ProGU was doing?
Thank
They
you.
are now implementing that right now. ProGU is putting that stuff in place. They're trying to implement it across, public schools around the country.
Exactly, and it's not just PragerU. So the White House, in preparing for the country's 250th birthday next year, it's the birthday of the, Declaration of Independence, they are attempting to rewrite the history of the United States. They have enlisted Hillsdale College, which is a right-wing college that is very popular online, operates a lot in Florida, and they do this, like, fakey version of history that covers over all the bad things, makes slaveries the same thing that PragerU does, makes slavery seem like, it wasn't so bad. It was really just like the slaves were like family. They were just working a little harder. But at least they had jobs. At least they had food, like making it seem like you shouldn't even think negatively about the country because most of the founders owned slaves. You shouldn't think negatively. You should think positively about it, like sort of gauzing over the history, right? But then you can't explain the lack. You can't explain why the average black family has like 1/100th the net worth of the average white family. It's impossible to explain unless you understand slavery, unless you understand what happened and the brutality and the truth of it.
And then you wonder why the average person, like, why don't you pull up yourselves by your bootstraps?
Don't
Because you were never taught about
We
Black
don't have
history and
bootstraps.
other history in this country.
Correct. And so now what you have is this attempt by this administration, the US administration, to do to the United States what Nigeria did to itself by erasing its history and creating a population that couldn't even explain the divisions that are literally ripping that country apart and harming one of the largest economies on the African continent, making it harder for that economy and that country to prosper. Right? They could prosper more if they actually could reckon with their history. Rwanda had to do that. Like Rwanda had, the Hutu and the Tutsi genociding each other. They had to reckon with it and figure out how to reckon with that in order to move forward. Rwanda has largely done that. And they have come back together as a country, but you had to deal with it. South Africa, they needed to deal with the fact that they had the exact same length time of slavery, enslavement, and their version of Jim Crow that we did, right? And they had to reckon with it. They haven't really done it fully. They had truth and reconciliation. They didn't fully do it. Okay, now I believe we have the Merc. Here he is. And the Merc joins me now. Thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate you. You are one of my favorite content creators and Substacks. Tell us how it is that Nigeria wound up erasing its history. Please explain.
Well, thank you. Well, it's an interesting situation. First of all, thank you for being a supporter. I know you're one of my first supporters on Substack.
Yes.
So I really appreciate that.
Of
Well,
course.
it's interesting. So late 70s, early 80s, the Nigerian government, it was sort of a gradual thing. So what happened, first of all, was that history was no longer mandated in schools. And what they did was they introduced a subject called social studies. So I went to school in Nigeria in the early 80s and I did social studies. And it wasn't till recently when the presidents reinstated history that I realized I never did history. So what social studies it's sort of like a civic education because we just had a civil war. So that was
Yep.
1967 to 1970. And what they wanted to do was to rebuild the nation. And it was more of a psychological social engineering kind of program where they didn't want people learning about history per se, just the nuts and bolts and facts of it, but they wanted very, very specific ideology. to unify the people. Because if you think about it, the more that they learned about the true history of Nigeria, the origin, the colonialism, where we came from, what the tribes were, the kingdoms, it will be very, very difficult to justify the Republic of Nigeria. So that was the reason. And listen, there's disputes as to whether that's, that is the only reason, because they gave a bunch of excuses. But that is what I believe is the truth. I mean, they said it was the teachers. There weren't enough teachers to do history. They said that history wasn't a viable subject for employment, that there wasn't enough interest from the students. But I believe it was a political thing, personally.
And the thing is, we were talking about before you come on, is that the parallels to what is being done in the United States, I think, are really kind of mind blowing, right? Because this idea that if you just don't tell a generation of Nigerians, in this case, what the history is, then they can be unified. But that if they know about the Civil War, if they're aware of the history, that somehow they won't be able to build one nation, to me seems a bit infantilizing to a people. But it's being done to us now. So tell me, how has that impacted Nigeria? Because it was done there.
Oh, no, it's been extremely bad. I mean, look, if you go to the average Nigerian on the streets, they don't know what years the Civil War was fought. They don't know what the two factions were, the reasons for the war, none of those things. In fact, we know more about colonial powers and the British Empire than we do about Nigerian kingdoms and so forth. But the parallels between what Donny T is doing in the United States and with the Smithsonian Museum and the executive order, I think it's 14253. The irony is that his statement is he says he's restoring truth and sanity to American history.
Right.
That's what he said. And what truth is the question that you would really ask? And the way that I look at it is that what he's doing and what the government of Nigeria did is actually the same thing. It's really about controlling narratives and controlling the perception of history. Because right now we're making history. So the more that you can control a narrative, the easier it is for you to manipulate a population. So I think when you look at why he wants to take out slavery artifacts and memories of slavery from schools, from museums, and what Ron DeSantis was doing in Florida when he was trying to take it out of textbooks, it's actually the same principle. You see, the mistake that people make is that they think this is about Black children. It's not about Black children. It's about white children.
That's right.
You see, the idea is for them, they're protecting their own children. They don't want, nobody's born racist, nobody's born prejudiced. You're conditioned to be a particular way. They understand that if we expose our kids to the truth, they will be more empathetic to Black people. Right. They'll be more empathetic to Africans. We will not be able to just blanket do things ad hoc, So it's funny because if you talk to the average white voter who is a Trump supporter, for example, and you tell them, what do you think of Marxism? And they'll be like, oh, Obama was a Marxist. He was this, he was that. And you say, okay, cool. What is Marxism? They can't tell you. Now, what is it that you're most against? The elites. We want to take down the elites. Then you're like, do you know who Karl Marx and Engels were? Do you know what they were talking about? They were categorically talking about a concept that history is a conflict between the elites and the populace.
Right.
The elites, the bourgeoisie, are the people who control production, and the proletariats are the people who control labor, and they sell labor. Now, if you understand that, the whole point about Marxism is that it's power to the people. Literally what you're saying is Marxism. Now, obviously, this is what the theory is, that obviously if Marxism is successful and the people take power back, it leads to communism. Like that is typically what it would lead to.
Right.
You're not going to go backwards. So that is where you then demonize the Chinese and so forth and so on, I said. But, and I'll say this as a final thing in this section, is that when you look at the last election and you understand what was being fought for, and you realize that, listen, you have corporatists, if you're talking about the left, you're talking about decorum, order, taxation, so on and so forth. And you look at the oligarchs, which is what you're really fighting against. The oligarchs typically just want mayhem. Because if they have mayhem, they can do what I think you've heard of it called rentier, I think it's rentier capitalism. The idea of rentier capitalism is what we all practice in terms of if you own land, it's basically being a toll gatekeeper. You don't produce anything, you charge people for access to what you have. That is how Elon Musk made his money with PayPal. That is how Jeff Bezos made his money with Amazon. That is how Donald Trump made his money with real estate. These people are all the same. Now, the scary thing is, if you look at what people like Betsy DeVos, I think of Amway, the Koch brothers, Bill Gates, I think, or the Waltons of Walmart have been doing, they are very focused on education and history. Just look at, they've pumped hundreds of millions of dollars to control education, to privatize it, defund the schools, take it out of the public schools, put it into charter schools and private schools. Why are they doing that? It's because they understand it's about narrative control. You need to control how people view things. So if you've read my stuff and all the stuff I do in my platform, it's all context-based. It's like, I'm just showing you that this is the true history they never taught you about Africa. And when you look at history, you then understand why we have problems in Africa today. That's it. Now, that is what Donity does not want. The more that people know about Black history, the more difficult it is to do the things that you do. I mean, I'm going to tell you a stat, but I want you to respond. But there's something I'll explain to you that most Black Americans don't know that really changes the perspective of how they see these things. But I know I've talked a lot, so I don't want to hog the mic.
No, please finish your thought. These are excellent thoughts, and I agree with every one of them.
Okay. So this is the thing. When you look at narrative control and you're thinking about what the solutions are, I told people, like in my audience, I said, I have a particular philosophy that is quite different when it comes to Pan-Africanism and the bridge to Africa from Black America. You see, there's something that Black Americans don't realize. They have a spending power of $1.8 trillion a year, revolving. That is annual recurring power. Do you know that if Black America was a country, it is the 15th most powerful country in the world? Do you know the only country is more powerful than a Black America? If we're talking about the United States of Black America, America, Britain, China, Russia, Brazil, Japan, Australia, Mexico, South Korea, France, and Italy. Do you know that Saudi Arabia isn't as powerful as Black America?
Wow.
Black America, the United States of Black America, is more powerful than any country in Africa, all countries in South America except Mexico and Brazil, all the countries in the Middle East except what am I missing? Actually, nobody. There's nobody in the Middle East. Like, there's no Middle East country as a whole that's more. So when you understand that, this is the trick. The trick is getting Black America to believe they need to ask for anything. You don't need to ask for anything. You see, what Donny T did, I view it as a blessing. And that's what I told my audience. I said, this is a wake-up call. This is a wake-up call to tell you that he never cared about you. America never cared about your history. They've done everything in their power to erase all memory of anything that ever happened to you while promoting, they've got a Holocaust museum. Nobody's ever going to talk about defunding that. So my belief is that when you have that kind of power, the trick is making you think you don't.
Right.
You can build your own museums. The museum that Black America could build could be the greatest museum we've ever seen in our lives. It could be the type of museum people fly from all over the world to go and see, to commemorate what your ancestors went through for 400, 500 years.
Well, and on that note, I am going to bring in, because this is such a powerful conversation, I was like, I can't wait. I'm going to go ahead and bring in Gary Chambers, my good friend and also the creator of Civics for the People. It's an innovative approach to educate and engage citizens on how government impacts their lives. He is a civil rights activist, an entrepreneur, all of the things. Gary Chambers, my friend, thank you so much for being here. And I brought you on because I wanted you to talk about, we're talking about Black Power with the Merc, and you are on that same page when it comes to your great state of Louisiana, which is, it's an undeveloped, right, Black Power state. And the city of New Orleans is a place that we've come to think of as a city that is kind of, the demonstration of what Black Power looks like in New Orleans, in the state of Louisiana. But there's an election coming up that could change that. Talk about that for a moment, and then weigh in if you'd like on what the Merc had to say.
Well, I loved everything he was saying because I think that it illuminates the need for us to collectively work together as a people. New Orleans has a mayor's race this weekend. Tomorrow, voting starts. Some of the high points for me are 2017, Joy, the last time that there was a competitive mayor's race in New Orleans. There was a total of 16,000 people that went to vote in that election, 10,000 Black folks, 4,000 white folks. This year, 2025, 38,000 people have gone to early vote. 22,000 of them are Black, 14,000 of them are white. That is a 103% increase in the Black community and a 188% increase in the white community in New Orleans. And so there's a lot of energy and attention towards this mayor's race. And if Black voters show up at the numbers that they need to, they will force a runoff. I am of the belief that a majority Black city should have a Black mayor. So I'm supporting Oliver Thomas in that race. And I believe that the more Black folks that show up to vote tomorrow, the higher the likelihood is of a runoff. And I believe if a runoff election happens, New Orleans will maintain Black leadership. And that's important, especially when you look at all of the things that we're dealing with. We have a governor in Jeff Landry who has sent a letter to Trump to federalize our National Guard. There's an intent to bring the National Guard into New Orleans. We don't need people that are going to be compromising or endearing towards these people. We need people who are going to stand up, have a backbone, and resist that level of occupation within our communities.
Yeah, can we just put up, Jason, put up the three candidates, because there are three people in this Democratic primary, right?
Yeah.
Let's talk about who they are, because this could be that moment when New Orleans, for the first time in a long time, has a non-Black mayor. Talk about these three candidates.
So you have Helena Moreno, who is the current sitting city council president. She's raised $1.8 million. She is the front runner in the race. 76% of white voters in New Orleans favor Helena Moreno. When you look at the other two candidates, State Senator Royce Duplessis and City Council member Oliver Thomas, they are competitively in the same range in polling. But about 21% of voters favor either one of them, and 25% of Black voters have been undecided. So that says 70% of Black voters in Orleans Parish do not want Helena Moreno to be the mayor of New Orleans, but she has amassed a ton of money and has used a lot of influencers and things of that nature to pull a portion of the Black vote. But again, if Black voters show up at the portion of the population in which they are or exceed that, then you can ensure that there's a runoff. And if there's a runoff, the likelihood of her being able to become the mayor of New Orleans becomes slimmer.
Gary, can you just speak to something that Merc was talking about earlier? We were having this conversation about erasure, and he was, he has a really great piece about how Nigeria effectively erased its own history in order to create this kind of false unity, so the nation could forget about its civil war and move on. Which sounds a lot like what's happened in the United States. I mean, I feel like the state of Louisiana is kind of a laboratory for that kind of sort of disconnection of a people from its memory, to force them to become less powerful than they really could be. Do you feel that that is something that's happened to people in Louisiana? You're always talking about how few people participate. Is that a disconnection in the memory of the power that folks used to or could have?
I think that it is not by accident that the New Orleans school system has been all charter for the last 20 years. I think it's not by accident when you look at the state of affairs in our state education system. You guys talked about the Walton family investing. Ann Walton invested in our state Bessie board races to influence who got elected into the state board of education here in the state of Louisiana. And so those things impact the quality of the education our children get and the history and the knowledge in which they have. But if you even look at Project 2025, the author from Louisiana went to the University of Louisiana at Lafayette, got his dissertation and studied slavery in Louisiana and Reconstruction in Louisiana. Why? Because some of the most audacious Black people in the history of this country were from Louisiana. But if you ask the average Black citizen in Louisiana where the first Black governor in the country came from, most of them have no idea that it was PBS Pinchback here in Louisiana. But that's not by accident. That is intentional, because you do know the names of Huey Long and several other governors from our past. But when you find out that there's been one Black person to hold this position in the history of our state, the average Louisianan has no clue that that person served there, or the turmoil that removed that person from office and prevented a Black person from being elected in a statewide office since 1872.
Let me go back to Merc for just one second, because there is this question that a lot of us have about how do we create unity among the diaspora. you're to me, you both represent, voices engaging Black people to engage our own power. How do we get that unity to be diasporal, Merc? How do we get Africans and African Americans and Caribbean Americans on the same page? And how do you get Africa on the same page? Can we just get Africa to make a United States of Africa already?
Right. I mean, I look, well, that's a whole different show.
Whole different show. You're gonna come back for that one.
But no, I think that is my focus. So most of my focus is about unifying, Black America and Africa and Black Britain as well, because I've spent equal parts of my life in all three. I spent many years in America. So I really became a man there. So I really understand a lot of the struggles, but also the perspectives of things. Because I had a friend, I was talking to him once many years ago, and I was complaining about, why don't you guys do this? What are you good? And he said, you know what? You know what it's like to be free. I don't know. My history ends with slavery. Like that is the end of the line. You actually can go back and and I never thought of it that way. So he just gave me a new perspective, and it's changed the way that I have the conversation. So now when I talk to people, I say, look, this is really an educational problem. When you don't control your narrative and you're forced to pin your history to something that is dictated to you by the oppressor, it's always going to be difficult for you to connect with the people that are on the other side. And it's just basic wedge politics. It's like, I'm going to import, for example, the best Nigerians into the United States, offer them these opportunities, and then utilize them to drive a wedge between Black Americans and the upper class. It's the same thing they did in South Africa with coloreds and Blacks. They created the colored delineation, which Tyler fell into that trap. They created that to separate the white ruling class from Blacks at the bottom of the barrel. So the way that I view it is quite simple. You need to not be afraid of power, because power is scary, especially when you've never held it. When you start looking at history and the number of times Black America has stood up, Tulsa, Greenwood, Lake Lanier, the list goes on, and how many times that those places were burned, destroyed, sabotaged. I think the only place that has ever been bombed by the US government is actually a Black neighborhood. I think that's the first and only time that's happened. It was in Chicago. I think it was
Philadelphia.
Yeah, it was the move. It was the move.
Right.
Yeah,
I think that's the only time it's ever happened. So
Yeah.
I think that has created a certain level of PTSD that makes it very difficult subconsciously for a lot of Black Americans to realize that, hey, you know what, at the end of the day, at this point, your history doesn't end with what is in the Smithsonian Museum. Because if it does, and if you embrace that ending, when I say ending, I'm talking about just the genesis of your lineage, it is very difficult to have the kind of power necessary to make certain decisions. You see, for me, it is automatic because I know my history. It's just automatic. So no matter what any racist cop says to me, and I've had many run-ins, when I was in America, no matter what anybody says to me, it's very difficult to break me down psychologically because I know so much about my history. I think that the only way that we can unify is, first of all, mutual respect. So for the immigrants like myself, is a respect for what Black America has actually gone through.
Amen.
A respect and understanding for the impact that has had generationally on the psyche of the Black American. And then an appreciation of the ground that Black America made to allow immigrants to even be in America and benefit from the things that they've fought for. That's important. On the flip side, and this is actually way more difficult, Black America have been starved of truth, of what Africa actually is and what it has for them. You have to understand that if it is promoted that we are a cesspool of corruption, hatred, and war, why are white people so obsessed with being in Africa? Why is it that when we beg them to leave, they will not leave? You know what I'm saying? Like, it doesn't make any sense. Like, if we're so bad, why are you still here? They're begging to stay. So that is the trick. And I keep telling people in my audience, I say, listen, they know what they're doing. They know it's a sinking ship in the West, and they're trying to establish themselves in my hometown. This is your birthright that they're trying to take. They stole you and took you over there to build that empire. That empire is now crumbling, and they want to come back here to take it's yours. It's
Yeah.
yours. So I think that is my view, that it's really a case of controlling history, controlling your narrative and your education. If you can't do that, it is impossible, because you're being trained to essentially be food for the oligarchs. And
Yeah.
as long as you're in that position, it's going to be very difficult.
Very difficult. I'm going to give Gary Chambers the last word, my friend, because I know it's really important that people really connect with the pragmatic thing that we can do to get whatever's left of this declining empire to work in our favor. Talk about what people need to do in the state of Louisiana tomorrow.
Well, you know, if you are in New Orleans, you need to show up and vote. There is a mayor's race, there's city council races. One other data point I wanted to give, Joy, is that when there's a citywide race for city council, and there are 2 Black candidates in that race. 60% of white voters do not know who they want to support when the candidates are Black, but 76% of white voters know who they want to support when there's a white candidate involved. So what we as Black folks need to understand is the data is clear. White people have no problem supporting, voting for, funding, and getting behind their people. We should have the same position to support, vote for, and get behind our people. Election day is tomorrow in New Orleans. Do your part.
And tell us who you're supporting. Jason, can you put back up the 3 people? You have a dog in this race that you think is the best choice. Tell us who and why.
I am supporting Oliver Thomas in this race. He is a current city council member who represents New Orleans East. He was previously on the city council 14 years ago. I believe that Oliver has the most realistic plan. He's got the backbone for the job. He wants to build 10,000 affordable new houses, do provisional permits for small businesses, make sure that citizens in New Orleans get 2-day-a-week trash pickup because they're getting 1 day a week while they're paying for 2 days a week. He wants city services to work for people, and he wants the government to wrap around the young people of New Orleans so that the culture and the vitality of New Orleans remains within the hands of the people that made that culture what it is, which is Black folks in New Orleans.
Gary Chambers Jr. We gonna make sure that your dad gets his due. Yeah, we gotta remember that he is there. So Gary Chambers Jr., thank you very much. The Merc, I appreciate you so much. You guys, we've done statewide, we've done local, and we've done international on this show on tonight. It is Alkebulan. I'm gonna spell it for you guys so you can figure out how to get it on Substack. ALKEBULAN. I'm going to put it in the show description below so that you guys can find it. You also need to check out The Crusaders, which is amazing. It is a really, really, really great graphic novel. Listen, you can get entertained while you learn. So we want you guys to support that too. Thank you. There it is, y'all. There it is. Support all of these incredible. These 2 brothers are doing the thing. Thank you both very much, Gary Chambers Jr. And the Merc. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, you guys. So there it is. You guys have your marching orders. If you're in the city of New Orleans, please vote tomorrow. Hopefully you're already registered. It is too late to register. You got to register. If you're registered, you need to vote tomorrow. Don't let New Orleans slip away. Thank y'all for tuning in. Be sure to like and subscribe. Share this channel. Make sure that everybody subscribes to the YouTube channel. 70% of people are lurking, watching these shows and not subscribing. Why would you do that? So make sure that you like, subscribe, and throw some comments in. Thank you all for joining the Joy Reid Show. See you on the next one, and goodbye for now.